All right, the Virginia colony.
Here we go. This is where note-taking strategies get real. Really pay attention to the things that we emphasize and repeat. Oh, notice the pretty colors on this slide. This identifies some very important information that you should know. Always pay attention to bolded, colored, underlined, etc. words.
For example, what sticks out to me instantly is the date 1607 and Jamestown. You must know that Jamestown was founded in 1607. Remember, it was the first permanent settlement, English settlement in the New World.
Our first English colony, Virginia. How delightful. Remember, Roanoke has already failed, disappeared off the face of the earth. Now the English, and more specifically Sir Walter Raleigh, are going to try again. By the way, Queen Elizabeth is the daughter of Henry VIII. Her mother was Anne Boleyn, one of the ones who was beheaded. Elizabeth is known to this day to be one of the finest queens England has ever had. She ruled for 45 years.
Virginia colony.
Raleigh thought he would be smart this time and let the men go first to set up the colony and then send over families. He thought there would be a better chance of survival. Okay, I have to laugh at this. They truly thought they were going to make it without the women?
These settlers spent their days digging for gold. No one worked. They each wanted to be the one to strike it rich. Also, they settled in a swampy location. They thought it would be good to settle near the coast. I get that, but in a swamp, not so smart.
The water was nasty. There were bugs everywhere that helped to spread disease. There wasn't any real food supply either, and no one was working on establishing a food supply. After the first winter, only 30 survived out of 105.
Okay, so let's recap that. 105 started. After that first winter, we have 30 survivors. Obviously, someone or something had to change. Enter our hero of the hour, John Smith.
John Smith saved Jamestown by instituting the work or starve rule. Basically, every colonist must contribute to society, to the greater good, farming, building, etc. If you did not put in your time, you did not eat a lime.
In order to eat, you had to work. This idea of working for the greater good is a principle that we should all institute. Many of our founding fathers did. This concept can also be known as civic virtue, putting your country's needs ahead of your own. Speaking of getting ahead, we are way ahead of ourselves. Let's get back to John Smith. He saved the colony. Yay! Go, John! Go, John!
It's your birthday. Go, John.
Should we stop? It's working.
Okay, the Virginia colony continued.
The Virginia colony continued.
Okay, I love Disney, just like the rest of the world. However, they got a couple of facts wrong in their movies. One being that John Smith did not marry Pocahontas. It was John Ralph. That seems kind of like a major mistake to me.
Me too. John Ralph is who turned Jamestown and the rest of Virginia into a profit-making machine. Notice that your notes say the Virginia Company. Remember, many colonists are going to be tied to businesses. These businesses fronted the money to make these colonies happen, and in exchange received a portion of the profit back. John Ralph will be a hero of the Virginia Company.
He is responsible for introducing tobacco to the soil of Virginia. Now, tobacco already grew in Europe. However, the demand was so high and production was low. When John Ralph planted tobacco in Virginia soil, it took off like a weed. Everyone began to grow tobacco, and the demand kept right up with the production.
Now, why do you think that the demand continued to grow? If you said smoking is addicting, you are correct. Think about it. The more people who tried smoking tobacco, the more people became addicted to it. That's great for business, not great for health. So again, the item that saved America is also responsible for killing Americans. Pretty ironic.
Many groups were affected by this introduction of tobacco to the colonies, and not all were positive. Women came over and began creating families and more settlements. Slaves were introduced to begin working on tobacco plantations. As tobacco production increased, So did the number of slaves imported to the colonies. You can actually see a direct relationship between these two items. Like if I were to draw a graph, the line for tobacco would increase, and so would the number of slaves coming into the colonies. Native Americans were another group. They were kicked off their land. Colonists did not feel natives made good use of their land, and therefore should not be allowed to keep it. Many poorer Europeans came to America as indentured servants. In exchange for the passage, that's their ticket to America, they agreed to work for a period of years for little or no pay. So you could argue that that was both a positive and a negative thing.
All right, continuing on with the Virginia colony. As the colony of Virginia grew, so did its need for government. With the colonies so far away from the king, a colonial government was needed. In Virginia, they established the House of Burgesses. This was the first elected assembly in America.
Ding, 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 ding. This is important.
This was the first elected assembly in America, the House of Burgesses in the Virginia colony. So, colonists were allowed to elect people to represent them in this assembly and make decisions for the colony. This is a very important aspect of our type of government that we have today. Republic, representative democracy, etc.
We do not have a true democracy. If we did, all citizens would vote on every issue in our government. As you can imagine, nothing would ever get accomplished. Therefore, we elect representatives to make decisions for us. This all started back with Parliament in England, and then the Virginia House of Burgesses.
These served as examples for Congress. Our Congress is bicameral, which means two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. The House of Burgesses was bicameral as well. This colonial assembly served as an example for other colonies as well.
This start of self-government will allow for more participation by the people, and therefore more say by the people in how their colony is run. Think about it. Parliament served all of England. The House of Burgesses served only Virginia, a much smaller scale of representation. A representative in the House of Burgesses might be representing 20 people, compared to 200 or more in England.
If you don't like what the government is doing, you have the power to change it through voting. This is such a powerful tool used by the people to voice their rights.
Look at the picture in the bottom left corner of the slide. What do you notice about these people? Describe the people inside and standing outside. What conclusion can you draw about the House of Burgesses? Bacon's Rebellion, continuing on with the Virginia colony. Bacon's Rebellion is one of our first examples of colonists acting out for what they believed in and speaking out against the English government. That is huge. Remember, the Stuart kings ruled with absolute power. When King James I took the throne, he removed Virginia's colonial assembly and replaced it with a royal governor. You can
imagine that the colonists had become quite accustomed to having their own way and say in government. Now, for that freedom to be taken away was very difficult for them. And in this particular case, it resulted in the use of violence for their voices to be heard.
Think about it. Think about when you're grounded for doing something wrong, and all those rights that you once had were taken away. It's a very difficult time. It's not fun. And that's exactly what the colonists felt like, is that they were being grounded, and they hadn't even done anything wrong.
All right, so as more and more colonists poured into Virginia, more and more Native Americans were pushed off their land. As you can imagine, tensions grew between these two groups. Colonists felt it was the job of the government to protect them from Native American attacks.
Nathaniel Bacon and his supporters were some of those colonists, and they decided enough was enough and that they had to stand up to the governor. And so they did that by burning Jamestown to the ground, and they drove that royal governor out of the colony. This freedom lasted just a short while, however, because Bacon died shortly after, and the rebellion couldn't stand with its outspoken leader. However, let this be foreshadowing of what is to come when it comes to the colonists, when the colonists disagree with the English government. They will continue to react, and they will continue to use violence.
All right, so on to Massachusetts. Again, here we have a very big date highlighted. That would be 1620, and that is
when the Pilgrims came to Massachusetts and settled in Massachusetts.
all right.
Massachusetts, another great colony. This one was founded in 1620. Is it me, or is that ear glowing? I wonder why. Oh, that's probably because you need to memorize it. So let's say it 5 times really fast. Really, really fast. Massachusetts was founded in 1620. 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 Whew, that was a mouthful.
Remember, when we talked about the Protestant Reformation? Well, I sure hope so. We just talked about it a few slides back.
Well, the Pilgrims and the Puritans were one of those groups who were persecuted for their beliefs. So the Pilgrims received permission from the king to move to Virginia.
Yeah, that's right. I said Virginia. However, they were blown off course and landed in Massachusetts instead. William Bradford was the head of this group of pilgrims, and they realized at once that they were not in Virginia.
So, before they even left the ship, they established a system of self-government. All men had to sign the Mayflower Compact, which established the principle of majority rule. In other words, all pilgrims had to follow what the majority said. We still use this principle today. So again, we see this idea of self-government and important ideas like majority rule already being established in colonial times. This will be huge when our founding fathers sit down and establish our government.
Okay, let's talk about the whole Pilgrim versus Puritan deal. Pilgrims are people who make a journey for religious reasons. Some historians have stated that pilgrims are truly just Puritans, but were named pilgrims for making the journey to America. Some argue that they truly were 2 separate religious groups who eventually merged into one. No matter what, we will be referring to them all as Puritans from here on out.
All right, let's discuss the government in Massachusetts. Since it was founded for religious reasons, the church was tied into every aspect of life. Even the government in Massachusetts was linked with the church. In fact, you had to be a church member to vote.
Leaders in the church were also the political leaders. So, if you were not a Puritan, you were an outcast. You couldn't participate in much without being involved in the church. Of course, there were some good points that came from Massachusetts.
Since church was so important to the community, everyone participated in making decisions regarding the church. These then spilled over into making decisions about the town. Natives at Thanksgiving. However, that relationship didn't last.
As more and more Puritans poured into Massachusetts, more and more Native American land was taken. The Puritans felt they had the right to the land as God's people. Natives were considered heathens, and since they didn't take good care of the land, it should be taken away.
However, natives didn't quite see it that way. In fact, natives believed no one could truly own land. It belonged to everyone. Metacomet unified several native tribes together to try to take the land back from the Puritans. This erupted into what became known as King Philip's War. King Philip was the name the colonists gave to Metacomet since he compared himself to an English king. The feud resulted in the loss of many Puritan towns and the killing of Metacomet.
All right, the Great Migration.
As the Stuart kings continued their dictatorship, like leadership of Britain, more and more religious groups were being persecuted. For one, the Stuarts had turned Britain back to a Catholic country. Puritans were considered outcasts for their radical beliefs and that went so against the Catholic Church.
John Winthrop took the reins to move thousands, over 20,000 to be specific, from England to Massachusetts. This event would become known as the Great Migration. So again, the Great Migration, when thousands upon thousands of Puritans who are being harassed by the Stuart King Charles make a migration to Massachusetts to escape persecution.
Still more about Massachusetts. In Massachusetts, we really find that education was important. much more so than in any other colony. Puritans believed everyone should know how to read. Why? Because they wanted everyone to be able to read the Bible.
This is where we see the start of our free public education. Also, Puritans had a strong work ethic. They very much worked for the common good before working for their own needs. We find this quite often throughout the colonies as people were spread so far out from each other.
And being so far from Britain as well. Having a strong work ethic was extremely important, not only to the survival of the colonies, but to the survival of America as an independent country. Dominion of New England. I've mentioned the Stuart Kings several times now, and here we see one of the finest examples of them exercising absolute power and extreme control over their entire kingdom.
Throughout time, the colonies had grown more and more independent. Not that they didn't honor the king, or were even thinking of becoming an independent nation, but they didn't necessarily always follow the laws. For example, some of the trade laws were quite strict, forcing the colonists to only trade with England. Colonists had worked around these by trading with other countries. And with the king so far away, it was hard for him to enforce these trade laws.
That is, until King James II.
Dun dun dun.
He decided it was high time to get those colonists under control. He revoked the original colonial charter, which was like a contract, so he was breaking the contract, and united all New England colonies together under a royal governor, a guy by the name of Andros. All self-government was forbidden.
Forbidden.
The freedoms colonists had become so accustomed to were now gone. Like town meetings, like colonial assemblies. Fortunately, this abuse of power was also taking place in Britain, and the British were not going to stand for it.
Glorious Revolution.
The Parliament, disbanded by the king, decided enough was enough. They asked James II's daughter, Mary, and her husband William to take over the throne. They were currently residing in the Netherlands, and since Britain was so much larger than the Netherlands, it was an offer they couldn't refuse.
Of course, Parliament wanted to make sure this sort of thing didn't happen again. So they had William and Mary sign the English Bill of Rights, granting even more power to Parliament and therefore to the people, since the power of Parliament comes from the people. This document also expanded individual rights, directly empowering the public. This document very much influenced our Constitution and our Bill of Rights.
I love this picture of William and Mary as children. Believe it or not, they may have actually been married by this Rhode Island, founded by Roger Williams and Anne Hutchinson. I would say that Roger Williams is given most of the credit. I can always remember his name because it starts with an R, just like Rhode Island. Get it?
Anyways, both Anne and Roger, yes, we're on first name basis, lived in Massachusetts. However, they had a few different ideas than the Puritans. The Puritans outlawed them from Massachusetts for their radical ideas. I love these pictures because they look like they've been arrested. In Rhode Island, they treated the natives more fairly. They also believed that the church and state shouldn't be so intertwined as in Massachusetts. Roger Williams specifically completely disagreed with the rule that you had to be a member of the church to vote. So he really was pushing for that separation of church and state.
I'm sorry, did you say the separation of church and state?
I did say the separation of church and state. And we're talking about Rhode Island.
And Roger Williams.
Roger Williams, Rhode Island.
Connecticut was founded by another former Massachusettsian. I don't know if that's a real word.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Thomas Hooker. Okay, go ahead and laugh now at his name, although I do remind you that you're in 8th grade. Mr. O, that includes you too.
Thomas believed in having a more democratic colony, even more than Rhode Island. He didn't believe you should have to be a church member in order to vote. All white property-owning men should be allowed to vote.
Connecticut was also responsible for writing the first Constitution in America, the Fundamental Orders of Connecticut.
The first Constitution in America. I don't know, but if this was my notes, Ms. Bradley, I think I might highlight that.
In fact, let's do that. Let's highlight it and let's say it together. Fundamental Orders of Connecticut.
Oh, I'm sorry, I missed out.
Fundamental Orders of Connecticut. This was a good example for our founding fathers to use when writing our own Constitution.
On to New York.
New York, New York.